There are stories so old they seem like whispers from another world, yet their warnings ring louder today than ever. Ancient civilizations carved into stone the promise that powers from beyond would one day return. What they described was not only myth, but a cycle, a countdown written in the heavens. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki, those who from heaven came to earth, and the Bible echoes the same rhythm through the visions of Daniel. Both speak of appointed times when history bends, when armies of heaven intervene. The connection is not accidental. It is a thread too clear to ignore. Now the year 2025 stands before us, carrying signs that mirror what was recorded thousands of years ago. The past may not be behind us at all. It may be approaching once again. Stay close, and before we continue, subscribe to this channel so you do not miss what comes next. Long before the year 2025 was seen as a critical turning point, ancient civilizations already warned of cosmic cycles of return. They spoke of times when the sky itself would signal transformation, when alignments of stars and planets announced the intervention of powers beyond human reach. What seems to modern eyes like superstition was, for them, the very structure of history, a calendar written not in ink, but in the movements of the heavens. The Sumerians gave these visitors a name that still echoes with mystery: the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Their tablets did not describe abstract myths, but detailed accounts of beings who descended at intervals, reshaping empires and reorganizing kingdoms. Every descent marked a new chapter. Every appearance changed the order of rulers. To the Sumerian scribes, history was never fully in human hands. It was guided from above. Centuries later, the Book of Daniel would echo this same pattern, though in a new language. What the Sumerians inscribed as physical visitations, Daniel recorded as visions of armies from heaven. Chapter 8 speaks of a fixed time when the heavenly hosts would intervene, a moment already determined, impossible to avoid. The rhythm of prophecy mirrors the rhythm of astronomy, suggesting both sprang from a common source that saw history as cyclical rather than random. The similarity between the two accounts is too striking to dismiss. Both point to intervals of return, both link cosmic signs to earthly upheaval, and both describe the intervention of powers descending from beyond. One uses the language of astronomy and kings, the other the language of prophecy and visions. Yet beneath the surface, the story remains the same. Humanity is not alone in shaping its destiny. Modern readers often reduce ancient texts to allegory, stripping them of their literal weight. But for those who carved these records, the events were real. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki not as distant gods, but as rulers who walked the earth. The Hebrews, seeking to protect their monotheism, reframed them as heavenly hosts under divine authority. The core experience remained. Beings descended, and the world changed. As we move closer to the year 2025, the signs described in both traditions begin to resurface. Rare alignments, global instability, and unexplained phenomena echo what the ancients preserved with such urgency. To dismiss their warnings as fantasy is to ignore the consistency of testimony across civilizations separated by centuries. Their voices, carried through clay and scripture, speak with renewed force today. The question is unavoidable. Were these stories symbolic visions, or records of real events that will repeat? The ancients risked everything to preserve them because they believed the pattern would return. And now, as the dates they described align with our own age, we are left with the same challenge they faced: to interpret the signs before it is too late. Tell me, do you believe these ancient records point to something real, or are they only shadows of human imagination? Archaeological digs in Ur, Nippur, and Babylon revealed fragments of clay that preserved more than myths. They preserved memory. These tablets carried lists of kings, descriptions of floods, and above all, astronomical records too precise to be the fruit of imagination. They mapped eclipses, planetary alignments, and constellations with a mathematical clarity that still puzzles scholars today. For the Sumerians, the heavens were not distant decoration. They were a clock, measuring the rhythm of destiny. Among these inscriptions, symbols like the ram and the goat appear with persistent repetition. To a modern eye, they may look like simple animals etched on clay. But for the ancient scribes, these were not metaphors. They were celestial coordinates. The ram pointed to Aries, the goat to Capricorn, markers of time woven into the sky. When the heavens aligned in these signs, change followed on the earth below. Kings were dethroned, wars erupted, and empires shifted under the weight of a greater design. The tablets also spoke of doors of heaven opening during these cycles. These portals were not fantasy in their language. They were described as thresholds where those from above the firmament descended. Repeated across regions and epochs, the image remains consistent. At certain fixed times, the boundary between heaven and earth grew thin. The visitors who crossed it were not imagined beings, but recognized as rulers whose authority exceeded mortal kings. Even more striking is the connection between these cosmic visitations and conflict. The text described the Anunnaki themselves at odds, waging battles for territory, resources, and dominion. Their struggles were not merely mythic parables. They were recorded with the same tone used to list human dynasties. To the Sumerians, history was not solely written by men, but shaped by powers descending from the sky. War among the Anunnaki meant upheaval among mortals. The precision of these tablets undermines any attempt to dismiss them as superstition. They tied celestial events to earthly outcomes with a consistency that mirrors how modern historians use timelines. When a solar eclipse darkened the sky, a dynasty crumbled. When planets aligned, armies marched. These were not coincidences in the eyes of the scribes, but evidence that their watchers from above dictated the tempo of history. As we read them now, it becomes clear that their knowledge rested on observation and calculation, not fantasy. The same texts that traced lunar cycles also tracked the returns of their celestial rulers. Every number carved in clay whispered a warning. Nothing on Earth was random. Everything followed a cosmic schedule. And in this rhythm, the return of the Anunnaki was inevitable, recurring like the turning of seasons. What astonishes most is how seamlessly this chronology flows into the later visions recorded in the Book of Daniel. The same symbols, the same sense of fixed time, and the same intervention from the armies of heaven appear again, centuries later. The echo is too sharp to ignore, which makes one question. If the ancients took such detail to preserve these truths, what are we overlooking today? Share your thoughts below. Do you believe these tablets hold more than history? When the Hebrews were carried into exile in Babylon, they did not enter a cultural vacuum. They found themselves surrounded by libraries of clay, walls engraved with stars, and priests who spoke of cycles written in the heavens. These were not foreign tales of distant tribes, but living traditions the Babylonians had inherited from Sumer. Forced to live among them, the Hebrews could not escape the gravitational pull of this knowledge. The tablets whispered of rulers who descended from the sky, and those whispers soon mingled with the sacred songs of Zion. The first transformation lay in language. Where the Sumerians named their visitors Anunnaki, the Hebrews reframed them as messengers of the Most High, armies of heaven under divine command. Multiplicity became unity. A pantheon became an angelic host. It was not a denial of the old stories, but a reinterpretation, placing every celestial being under one supreme authority. In this way, the Hebrew faith preserved its monotheism while still absorbing the structure of what they had learned in Babylon. Roles shifted as well. In the Sumerian accounts, the Anunnaki ruled as lords of heaven and earth, shaping empires with their arrival. Within Hebrew tradition, these figures were recast as servants rather than sovereigns. Yet their functions remained recognizable. Beings who intervened in human affairs, carrying messages, executing judgment, or defending nations. What was once described as direct governance now became mediation under the will of a single god. Astronomical precision followed a similar path of adaptation. Babylonian records tied constellations and alignments to concrete historical shifts. For the Hebrews, these became prophetic markers. A solar eclipse was no longer just a celestial event. It was a sign from the heavens of divine action unfolding. The ram and the goat that once pointed to constellations now lived again in visions, transformed into symbols of kingdoms rising and falling at appointed times. In this way, what had once been carved as data became sung as prophecy. The Hebrews did not erase the science they encountered. They recast it in spiritual tones. They saw no contradiction between astronomy and revelation, only different languages telling the same story. Numbers that marked celestial cycles became periods of tribulation or deliverance. Observations of the sky became visions of God's plan stretching across centuries. The skeleton of the Sumerian narrative remained intact. There was still a pattern of descent, still a rhythm of intervention, still a cycle that tied heaven to earth. Only the interpretation shifted. Where the Babylonians saw rulers from beyond the firmament, the Hebrews saw the unfolding will of the Almighty. But both saw history as something written above, not merely below. In both traditions, human destiny was synchronized with the stars. This fusion shaped not only the book of Daniel, but the entire prophetic imagination. Without Babylon, there would be no visions of beasts, no battles of heavenly armies, no timelines marked by appointed days. The Hebrews carried with them fragments of Sumer dressed in sacred robes, echoes of clay reframed as covenant. And when those visions reached future generations, they no longer read like foreign wisdom, but as divine revelation itself. If this blending of cultures fascinates you, leave a like to show it deserves to be heard. The 8th chapter of Daniel opens with a vision that has unsettled interpreters for centuries. A ram with 2 horns, a goat charging from the west, and a little horn that rises to challenge the armies of heaven. To a purely religious reader, these are symbols of kingdoms, empires locked in conflict until one swells beyond measure. Yet when placed beside the Sumerian tablets, the imagery becomes sharper, almost technical. The ram and the goat are not arbitrary figures, but constellations, celestial signposts marking fixed intervals in the sky. For the ancients, these constellations were more than shapes drawn from stars. They were instruments of time. Aries, the ram, signaled one era, while Capricorn, the goat, marked another. The meeting of these constellations coincided with cosmic cycles of upheaval, times when boundaries between heaven and earth thinned. Daniel's vision echoes this exact structure, recasting astronomical markers as prophetic images, transforming science into sacred narrative. The little horn that reaches toward the heavens takes on a dual meaning. In the religious framework, it is a kingdom or ruler who dares to defy divine authority. In astronomical terms, however, the horn resembles a planetary alignment, a specific point of conjunction extending across the firmament like a spear of light. The same phenomenon that the Sumerians carved into clay appears once more, though veiled in the language of prophecy. The armies of heaven described in Daniel mirror the Anunnaki in the tablets. To the Hebrews, they were divine hosts carrying out God's will. To the Sumerians, they were beings descending to reshape the order of kings and nations. The parallels are undeniable. Celestial armies intervening, fixed times determined, and earthly history bending under their command. What differs is not the sequence of events, but the interpretation of the actors involved. When viewed this way, the vision of Daniel does not stand in isolation. It becomes part of a continuum, a retelling of an older story with new symbols and a new framework of faith. The ram, the goat, the horn, the armies, all of them reappear as if the same hand guided both the astronomer's stylus and the prophet's pen. The prophecy becomes a coded reflection of an ancient astronomical calendar. This blending of science and spirituality explains why the vision has endured. Its language allows both believers and historians to find meaning within it. For the faithful, it is proof of divine orchestration. For those tracing cultural memory, it is evidence of how the Sumerian worldview was absorbed, reshaped, and passed forward through Hebrew scripture. Either way, the parallels bind the two traditions into one continuous thread. The question is not whether these visions were symbolic or literal, but whether they were both at once. Could it be that the prophets clothed astronomical cycles in sacred language so future generations would preserve the truth without discarding their faith? If so, Daniel's 8th chapter is more than prophecy. It is a cosmic schedule written twice, once in clay and once in scripture. Do not miss what is coming next. Subscribe now so you can follow this story as it unfolds further. Among the most remarkable discoveries from Mesopotamia is the Mul Apin series, a collection of astronomical texts inscribed on clay that detail the movements of stars, planets, and constellations with staggering accuracy. These were not myths disguised as science. They were systematic records that modern astronomers can still verify. Lunar phases, equinoxes, solstices, and eclipses were charted with such care that they rival medieval European star charts created thousands of years later. For the Sumerians and Babylonians, the sky was a library, and every celestial event was a line in history's script. What makes these records extraordinary is not only their precision, but their correlation with earthly events. Dynasties rose and fell in step with eclipses. Empires expanded or collapsed as planetary alignments marked the heavens. To the ancient scribes, this was not coincidence, but confirmation. The same forces guiding the stars guided human destiny. The Mul Apin tablets functioned as both an astronomical almanac and a prophetic calendar. The Hebrew scriptures reflect this worldview in subtler form. Where the Sumerians listed constellations and calculations, the Bible spoke of signs in the heavens. Daniel's timeline, though stripped of technical detail, preserves the rhythm of those cycles. The visions do not describe planetary motions explicitly, yet their structure matches the framework of Sumerian astronomy. The goat, the ram, the horn. These are not random images, but echoes of the very symbols that guided Babylonian skywatchers. Archaeology strengthens this connection further. Excavations across Mesopotamia reveal not only texts, but instruments, shadow clocks, gnomons, and early star maps etched into clay. These were the tools used to anchor their cosmic chronologies. Every artifact shows that the ancients were not guessing at the heavens, but measuring them with intent. Their science was inseparable from their theology, binding the observation of stars to the belief that higher powers directed them. When placed side by side, the archaeological record and the biblical visions form a mirrored pattern. One speaks in numbers, the other in metaphors, but both trace the same cycles of upheaval and renewal. The convergence suggests that the Hebrews did not invent a new narrative but inherited and sanctified an older one. What had been charts of constellations became visions of divine armies, yet the timetable remained intact. This raises profound questions. If the Sumerians could track cycles with such clarity, what did they see coming that we still refuse to acknowledge? And if Daniel echoed their knowledge in spiritual form, does that mean prophecy and astronomy were once two languages telling the same truth? The evidence does not allow us to dismiss the possibility. The stars leave no room for fabrication. They move with laws no man can alter. The fact that ancient records align with historical upheavals and biblical visions suggests a shared source of knowledge. Perhaps the heavens themselves have always spoken, and humanity has merely translated their voice through different cultures. What do you think? Are these parallels coincidence, or do they reveal a hidden continuity? Leave your comment and let us know where you stand. When the Hebrew scribes carried fragments of Babylonian knowledge into their own scriptures, they did not transfer it word for word. Instead, they reshaped it, trimming away names, altering images, and clothing technical detail in poetry. The first and most striking change was the erasure of original identities. The Anunnaki disappeared as named rulers of the sky and re-emerged only as faceless hosts of heaven. By removing the specificity of titles and functions, the Hebrews safeguarded their monotheism while retaining the skeleton of the story. Technology and cosmology underwent the same transformation. Portals described in the Sumerian tablets, doors through which beings descended, vanished from the Hebrew texts. In their place, the imagery softened into visions and dreams, experiences framed within the mind of the prophet, rather than physical descents upon the earth. What once sounded like engineering became metaphor. The transfer was deliberate. Knowledge that might have clashed with faith was rephrased as revelation. Celestial warfare followed the same path. The Sumerians described conflicts among their sky gods as battles that spilled into human history. Cities fell not only because of armies, but because rival Anunnaki contested their dominion. In the biblical adaptation, those struggles remained but were spiritualized. Battles among the stars became wars between angels and fallen hosts, no longer measured by weapons of stone, but by the will of God. Chronology also shifted. The Sumerian records tied events to exact years, calculated through eclipses and planetary cycles. The Hebrew texts blurred those dates into appointed times, or seasons, stripping away the mathematical precision, but preserving the sense of inevitability. Where one culture offered a schedule, the other offered a mystery, yet both pointed to recurring moments when history bent under heavenly intervention. Even so, the essence of the story endured. The Hebrews may have erased names, but they did not erase roles. They may have hidden dates, but they preserved cycles. Beneath every prophetic vision lies the shadow of Sumerian astronomy. The goat and the ram, the armies of heaven, the fixed times, all remain, though wrapped in different garments. The continuity is undeniable, even when veiled in sacred poetry. This process of adaptation reveals both caution and reverence. The Hebrews honored the knowledge they encountered but refused to let it fracture their covenant. They carried forward what aligned with their faith, recasting the rest in images that served devotion rather than confusion. The result was a narrative that felt wholly their own, while still carrying echoes of an older world. To recognize this is not to diminish Scripture, but to deepen its mystery. It shows how revelation can absorb human memory, how divine truth may speak through layers of culture. The adaptation was not an erasure, but a transformation, ensuring survival across centuries. What do you think? Was this shift an act of concealment, or a way of preserving a truth too vast to reveal openly? Share your view in the comments. Your perspective might illuminate what others overlook. As the world approaches the year 2025, astronomers have noted rare alignments that mirror the very cycles preserved on Sumerian clay. Conjunctions of planets unfold in constellations once tied to upheaval, just as the ancients recorded. Eclipses mark turning points, casting shadows across nations as if echoing the prophecies carved thousands of years ago. The sky today seems to be replaying a pattern that ancient eyes watched with reverence and fear. Political instability intensifies the weight of these celestial signs. Nations fracture under pressures that feel larger than human decision. Economies tremble, alliances shift, and unrest spreads across borders. This turbulence resembles the historical transitions the Sumerians linked to cosmic cycles. When the heavens moved in precise patterns, empires either collapsed or rose, as though guided by unseen forces. The same tremors now shake our own foundations. Strange phenomena in the sky attract attention not only from professional astronomers, but from ordinary observers. Unusual lights, unaccounted for movements, and radiant flares appear in ways that resist easy explanation. While skeptics dismiss them as coincidence or atmospheric tricks, the parallel with ancient accounts is unsettling. The tablets spoke of doors of heaven opening, moments when beings crossed boundaries between worlds. What once sounded like myth now echoes in modern skies. Archaeology adds another layer. Excavations reveal Sumerian symbols in places far beyond Mesopotamia, from the sands of the Middle East to the hidden corners of South America. These discoveries suggest that the memory of the Anunnaki was not confined to one people, but spread across continents. As ice melts and deserts shift, forgotten structures emerge, etched with the same celestial motifs. It is as if the earth itself is uncovering what had long been buried, just in time for this cycle to return. The biblical text of Daniel, particularly the 8th chapter, speaks of a time determined, a moment fixed, when the armies of heaven would intervene. To many, this was interpreted spiritually, but the timing aligns eerily with the astronomical cycles we now witness. The ram and the goat of Daniel are not silent. Their constellations still stand above us, marking seasons of upheaval. The prophecy and the science converge upon the same horizon. Skeptics will argue that history repeats by human hand alone, that the cycles are mere coincidence. Yet the synchronization between sky, scripture, and present events resists dismissal. When prophecy and astronomy converge, when nations falter as stars align, one cannot help but wonder if we are living through the very return our ancestors feared and expected. The question is not whether signs exist, but whether we have the courage to read them. 2025 may not simply be another year. It may be the appointed moment when ancient words become reality once again. And if that is true, what role will humanity play in the unfolding of this pattern? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you see the signs? Or do you believe they are illusions born of fear? If the cycles described by the ancients truly converge in the year 2025, the question is no longer abstract. It becomes urgent. What exactly is about to unfold? The Sumerian tablets and the biblical visions seem to point toward the same horizon, though they speak in different tongues. Both warn of intervention, both describe upheaval, and both insist that history does not drift aimlessly. It follows a schedule carved into the heavens themselves. The idea that such a return could be physical as well as spiritual unsettles modern minds. For centuries, scholars preferred to read Daniel's visions only as allegories, dismissing any literal meaning. Yet the Sumerians left records too detailed, too calculated, to dismiss as fantasy. They spoke of beings descending at fixed times, reshaping empires and rewriting human destiny. To ignore the possibility is to overlook the consistency of evidence across cultures and millennia. Imagine then that the doors of heaven described in the tablets are not metaphors but actual gateways. What would it mean if those portals were preparing to open once more? The upheaval of nations, the instability of nature, the strange phenomena in the sky, all could be signals that the threshold is near. The past may not simply echo but repeat, and what our ancestors witnessed could return before our own eyes. This possibility casts Scripture in a new light. The visions of Daniel would not be detached parables, but encoded accounts of cosmic timing. The ram, the goat, the little horn, the armies of heaven, all of these could be keys to recognizing the cycle's reappearance. Instead of vague prophecy, we may be holding a coded map, one that only makes sense when read alongside the ancient records of Sumer. The weight of this idea explains why it has been resisted, even ignored, for centuries. To accept it would mean admitting that humanity is not the sole actor in its own history. It would mean acknowledging that forces beyond our world intervene at intervals too precise to deny. Such a realization would shatter modern assumptions about independence and control. And yet that is exactly what both Clay and Scripture declare. As the days draw closer to 2025, the convergence of these narratives demands attention. We stand on the edge of a pattern that may soon complete its cycle. If the ancients were correct, if prophecy and astronomy are two mirrors reflecting the same reality, then we are not merely readers of history but participants in its next chapter. The past is not gone. It waits to step forward once again. The choice now belongs to us. Will we dismiss the signs as coincidence, or will we prepare for what may come? This is not just speculation but a call to awareness, an invitation to open our eyes to the continuity of time. Do not let this moment pass unnoticed. Subscribe now so you can follow each revelation as we uncover what may be the most decisive return in human history.